So we're going to talk about tables, all right? And tables in InDesign take a little bit of getting used to, I've found, all right? So I'm just going to kind of go through the ways to create tables and how to work with them, and then we're going to do at least one exercise with it. Because there is, in the iPhone sell sheet, there's a small table in there that you will have to build out, all right? So I'm just going to build, I'm just going to create a 8.5 by 11 page, or 11 by 8.5. And so tables are in effect kind of a text element from the standpoint of they live inside of a text box. It doesn't matter how you create them, they live inside of a text box, all right? So there's more than one way to put a table on a page, and there's several different ways to get table data into a document, all right? So I'm going to just step through a couple of them here, and then we'll do that again later. So I've got my page. The first way I can do it is pretty simple. If you look up here along the top bar, there's a table menu item. And if you go down to create a table, brings up create a table dialog, and you can set, number of rows, number of columns, header rows. I'm going to put one in, and I'm going to leave footer row out. And I don't have any, this document doesn't have any styles set up, so I'm not going to set up a style. But you can define all this stuff right off the bat, all right? So the first way here is just say create, and you'll notice that your icon gets that little table looking, or the cursor gets that little table looking icon in the lower corner of it. And all you do is you click and you drag out the area that you want your table to take up, and it puts it in place, all right? This method, whatever area that you draw is the space that your table will take up, and it'll just distribute the rows and columns evenly over that space, all right? So, but the one thing that's kind of important to point out here is that if I select this, I've got all these handlebars around it, and if I pull these out, this is a text box. So whenever it places that table on the page, it places it inside of a text box. And just to demonstrate that this lives alongside the rest of your text, I place my cursor in there and go down to fill with placeholder text. It'll drop it in right beneath it. And tables tend to be sort of an inline thing like that, all right? So that's the first way, and it's very Microsoft Word-like, if you will, It's pretty much the same way it works there. So that's the first way. Second way is, I'll just add a page, go down here. Second way is to take your text tool, draw out a text box, and your cursor will be blinking inside of it. Go up to the table menu, insert table, you'll get that same dialog again, and say OK, and it'll place it into the text box you just drew. It will match the width, but it'll make each of the cells only the height of the default fonts, or the default paragraph style, basically. So the difference between, virtually identical looking things, but based upon how you do it, you can give it shape by doing it this way, but it just kind of plops itself into the middle of the page this way, all right? So those are fairly simple ways of adding a table. Third way is, let's add another page. So the third way is to, and I'm going to go over here and grab, let's see, I got this Excel data file. Generally we won't work with this, but this is good for me to show kind of how all this works a little bit and to show some different stuff. So I've got this Excel doc that is 140 rows. Let's do that again. So I'm just going to copy that text. Why does it keep doing that? Oh, I know why it does it. Here, let's do this. No, go away. All right. Let's do this instead. Just like that. And I'll go down here to there. I'll just grab that block of text. So if I copy this, go back over to InDesign, and I'm just going to draw text box out and paste it in. So this came out of an Excel doc. Microsoft Word tables work fairly similar, which we'll look at as well. But basically it puts it in as tabbed content. If I just select all of that and I go back up to my table menu, now convert text to table is an option that's highlighted. So if I select that, it gives me a dialog, and I can define what separates a column, a row, that kind of thing. The defaults work for an Excel doc. And when I say OK, it takes all that data. Any place that there was a return line, it created a new row. And any place there was a tab, it created a new column. So if I undo that, I can kind of tell. Remember the last couple of classes when we looked at, if you go to the type menu and look at show hidden characters, you can see what all those are. That's one of the ways you can kind of tell how that's going to work. You can be pretty assured that with an Excel doc, what I just did is going to work out just fine. Word documents can get a little iffy, but at least, you know, knowing what you're looking for is part of the trick there to make that all work. All right. So if I just select all of that and go back, table, convert text to table, say OK. There's my data all put into a table. It overflows this text box because you see I got that little red plus sign there. I could close this down a little bit, maybe. Or just add another page. I can click in this, draw a new column for my overflow, just like any other text, because that's all it is a text item. And that table will continue to flow from page to page. And there's still more, but I'll leave it at that for right now. So there's a third way to put a table into InDesign. So just the same way, and probably gonna be easier if I created a new document now. Just so you know, just the same way that if I draw, actually, we'll create a new document if I want to do something different. So I've kind of avoided the primary text frame thing up to this point, and I'm going to use that now. And I've only got one page here in my document, all right? So what primary text frame is going to do is when it creates that document, it's going to put a text frame into it that is kind of an automatic text frame, and it's going to size it to where my margins fall, all right? So select primary text frame and just for simplicity, so there's not so much floating around. I want to make that one column too. So if I just click here, you'll see that there's a text frame in place. So I've got that same Excel file downloaded to my hard drive. So if I go File, Place, it's the same way I place an image, I can place text. And I'll go over and find my file. It's this data sample. I'll open it, and it'll drop it straight in as well. Notice that automatic text frame went and created 2 additional pages for me. I only had 1 when I started, and it linked them all together. So if you've got a very long document, catalogs, a book, a multi-page price list, which is what this would end up being, that automatic text area is beneficial from the standpoint of you don't have to create all these multiple pages. You don't have to draw new boxes and link them all up. So, and now that it pasted all of that in, if I just place my cursor in there and Command A, select it all, it'll select everything. And I'm going to do what I just did, convert text to table. Say OK. And now it's all in place. So you can copy and paste text in that way. You can also place it through the file menu, just like you would an image or anything else. So I would say, by and large, the more common way of placing text in a document is to do the copy-paste method, but there are times when being able to place it into a text area is beneficial. So use the place option. All right. So those are the 4 primary ways of setting up a text block. So when there's a slight difference in doing it these different ways. So by doing the place method, it brought everything in and it created a document with this table in it, but they're all body cells. There are no header rows as a result. And if you remember, on these documents, when we created these tables, one of the things we said was that we wanted to have a single header row, which means the first row of this table is actually a header row. All the rest of them are body rows, all right? But in the one we just did where we did the place, or even this one where we just copied and pasted the text in and used the text to the table, it doesn't create that header row, all right? So if you want a header row, you've got to do that manually. So this one's just the cleanest document and the easiest to see everything on. So if I select this first row, I can go back up to my table menu, and there's an item, Convert Rows, and I can convert that to a header. And now it's a header row. And I'm going to do one other thing real quick. I'm just going to go to my swatches, and just so I can see the difference, fill that with black and make the text white. All right? So here's the benefit of having a header row. On small tables, I may or may not bother, doesn't really matter. But the benefit in a larger document like this, where I've got a table that spans multiple pages, every place the page breaks, I get a new header row at the top of that page. Whereas if we go over here and compare it to our first document, the next page just picks up with the next item in line. So Header rows are nice from that standpoint, that it'll automatically put a header at the top of every page. I can't actually, if I go down to page 2 or page 3 here, I can't actually get in and do a whole lot with that row, actually at all, because it's locked. But if I come up here to the first one, and I change it to the background on that to pink, all of those will turn pink. So it's kind of the benefit of having a header row in a document, is that it'll automatically repeat it from page to page. You don't have to have a header row in a document. I've done, actually the small table that's in the cell sheet, you may or may not want to. It does have something that looks like a header, but you can format that just as easily. I find the benefit of the header row is much greater if you've got a table that spans multiple pages, kind of like this, all right? So, any questions in general about that? All right, so I'm gonna abandon that document, go back over to this one. And let's go back up to this, get rid of all that. And I'm just gonna real quick change my columns to 1, just because it's kind of confusing with 3 in there. All right. So let's talk a little bit about manipulating the table. So by default, everything's nice and evenly spaced and whatnot, but clean this up a little bit. So with my selection tool, I can come out here. So if I place my cursor in the table, I can select individual rows. See how the cursor turns into that down arrow, or individual columns? And if I push the shift key, I can select multiple columns. Same thing goes for rows. And then if I go up over top of the upper corner and click, I get the black arrow and a diagonal. Select that, it'll select the entire table, all right? I can also click in here and I can move my dividers around. If you notice, whenever I pull these inner ones, it actually shoves this outer one out. It doesn't just adjust them inside. What this can cause is, if I have, if my table's out here, and I decide I need more room here, it'll shove it outside of my text area. But if I just come back in here, I can kind of close these back up gradually. I'll pull this in, slide this out, make it match up. And then I can redistribute these nice and evenly by, if I select the entire table, I can go back up to my table menu and distribute columns evenly, distribute rows for that matter. I'll distribute columns evenly. It'll snap them all back into line. Maybe I want this one to be wide, but I want these ones to all be the same. I can just select those 3, table, distribute columns evenly, and it'll just distribute those 3, all right? So the same thing goes for rows. If I pull those around, it just kind of stretches it all out, but you just got to watch for it running out beyond the edge of your page, beyond the edge of your text frame. The same thing happens if I decide I want to add another column. So I can do that by either, if you notice up here in our control bar, these are our rows and these are our columns. I can add additional columns, just going to stack them out to the side. Anytime you reduce it, or at least the first time, it'll give you that warning. So you can stack them out that way. You can also use, and of course I don't have them up. If I go under window, down to type in tables, and grab my table panel. Let's float it out here. The table panel gives me access to the number of rows, number of columns I've got as well. So I can increase my number of rows. I could, kind of pull these all up. Select them all. Redistribute those. So when you start moving columns around, it's it will move the columns outside of your text frame. So you got to kind of watch for that a little bit. It makes it kind of hard to see it if you're looking at it in preview mode like I am, but if I go back to you can at least see those outlines sticking out beyond. So you've got some warning anyway. Just like any other text element, if my text area is too small, it'll shorten that down, but it gives me that little red plus sign off to the side. If I just click on that, I can draw a new text block to take care of the overflow. All right? So that's the basic ways of setting up a table as well as manipulating columns. All right? So the next thing I'm going to do is, let's see, what do I still have in here? All right. All right, so I'm going to go back over to this table with some content in it. Actually, maybe it's easier to tell here. I'll do it here first. Change my mind. So tables with all these rules all over the place aren't very attractive and generally not what we want, especially when we start putting some content into them by default. By default, it's all pretty tight and whatnot. What did I do? There we go. So what's the point of having a table if you can't format it the way you want? To be entirely honest, whenever I first started learning tables, this is the one thing that was a hair frustrating to me. Tables always kind of frustrated me until a few years ago. Only because there's a few things about them that aren't super intuitive, that don't really work the way you expect them to. But kind of what I figured out was if I work with them a certain way, it gets a lot easier. So with a table, you can format the table overall, and you can format the cells individually. All right? So it's two different methods of doing it. So I'm going to start by, and everything I'm going to do now, going through either the contextual menu or the table menu, you can also do from the flyout panels here. All right? So I'm just going to select that entire table. And if I right-click on it, Table Options is sitting right here at the top. So I'm going to go to Table Setup. The important thing about this list here is these are all tabs inside of Table Setup. So if you go to Table Setup, start there, you'll have access to all of these others. But if you know you specifically want to modify column strokes or whatever, you can go directly into that tab. So I'm just going to start with table setup. I'm going to work from the outside in, all right? So the border around the entire table, not the rules inside of the table, around the cells, the border around the entire table is controlled through table setup. And it's controlled by the table border setting right here. You remove that border by changing the weight to 0. Changing the weight to 0 on the surface, changing the weight to 0 and changing the color to none at first kind of give the same results, as long as all I'm doing is pulling the border off of the table. But when I get in and start messing with cells, it seems the formatting of cells kind of trumps whatever you do at the table level. So if I decide if I apply a border, if I don't want a border around the entire thing, but I try to apply borders inside of here, sometimes it'll add the border back into the outside. So, short of making it happen, that's the best way I can kind of explain that. If you want to remove the border around the entire table, do it from table setup, change the weight to 0. Anytime you want to remove a border from anything, a cell, the table itself, change the weight to 0 is the best solution. Because if I do that and I say OK, click out here, you'll see the border around the whole thing is off, but I've still got lines on my rows and on my columns. So I'm going to go back out here, select my entire table again, right click. I'm going to go back to table setup, although now I could go to alternating row strokes if I wanted to, because row strokes, when you go to alternating row strokes, it's this tab right here. Here's what always got a little counterintuitive to me. So when I go into row strokes, there's obviously a stroke on every single one of these rows, but it says none. And the key is that it's the alternating pattern that's none. If I want to remove the stroke from all of those rows, I need to set alternating pattern to every other row. There's the counterintuitive part. I want to take them off, and I'm telling it to add them. But then I go into my weights, and I set the weight of the first row to 0 and of the alternating row to 0. If I hit the preview button, you'll see that it removes all of those. I say OK, they're all gone. The only one that's left is, whenever I built this table, I told it I wanted a header row. There's still a stroke underneath that header row. So you can remove row strokes that way, and the same thing goes for columns. So select the whole thing, right click on it. I'll just go straight into alternating column strokes for now. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to tell it every other column. And I'm going to set them both to 0. Say OK. So my table's still in here. I can see these blue guidelines in my preview, but I've removed all of the strokes from all of those. And then the last thing I'm going to do is, I'm going to leave the stroke on this header row, but if I want to remove it, I'm just going to select that header row and change the stroke on that to 0 to get rid of that. all right? And then one last thing in that table setup is table options, table setup, fills. So I've removed all my rows, all my strokes, but maybe I want every other row to be a light gray. This alternating pattern concept kind of comes back into play. I'm going to say every other row. I can select every second, every third, but every other row is fairly common, so I want to start with that. And it's going to set the first row to 20% of black, and the next row to none, so that I get alternating colors of rows. And if I want to make my header a different color here, I'm just going to select that row. I'm going to fill it with black, and I'm going to make the text white. And then if I want my first row to be white instead of gray, I'm going to go back into that table, table options, alternating fills, and I'm going to skip the first row because if I skip the first row, it'll pick up that coloring on the second. So now I can change the order of the tints of those individual rows. Any questions about all of that? Anything worth recovering? Or we'll do this on I've also got the copy doc up for the cell sheet, for the iPhone cell sheet. We're going to pull the table out of there and use it. So that's working with a table so far, and we haven't really even done anything with style sheets with that in any way, shape, or form. If you only have a single table in your document, you can probably get away without using style sheets at all for your tables. But if you've got multiple tables that need to look the same, is when we'll want to talk more about style sheets. So, and style sheets for tables work just like they do for paragraphs and characters and whatnot. Not only that, we can use paragraph styles within our table styles. So I'm going to go back to preview mode here. So I've got a header row and I've got body copy rows. So I'm going to just put a little bit of something in some of these rows. Copy those. All right, so I've got some content in my table. So right along here whenever I went to window menu and down to type in tables and selected tables, I got my table styles and cell styles right there along with it. Just like paragraph and character styles, I've applied some styling here. I could make these styles kind of a default style if I want to. So if I, select my whole table here, go under my table styles, I can just add a new style, call this my basic table, base table. And it'll have all of the settings that I already put into it. Just like with paragraph and character styles. If I format the text first, create the style sheet second, it'll pick up all of that formatting. If I can do that, and I've got this base table applied to everything there. These are pretty much all the same settings that I just looked at whenever I use the contextual menu to format this table. So there's a lot of consistency in there. The other item we have here is that we can also, if we create, we don't have any cell styles right now, but we could, if we create cell styles, we can define them within this table style option so that anytime we have a table throughout our document, if it's variations of similar information presented differently, we can simply select the table style and apply all the formatting we need to that in one click. Because we can identify we have a header row set, so we can identify a style for our header rows, our footer rows, the body rows, and it even gives you different ones for left and right hand columns. So I'm not going to do anything with those right now, but I will come back to this and look at that. So I'm just going to say okay. And then I'm going to select, why don't we do, so I'm going to select all of my body rows here. Just highlight, and I can select all of those. And I'm going to go to my cell styles and create a style for body cells. So each of these little squares in my table is a cell. It's going to apply this to all of those cells. All I'm going to do here is, each of these needs a little bit of extra room around them. Everything's kind of crowded. So I can set an inset. On those to kind of space stuff out a little bit. Give it some room. I can set, I'm not going to here, but I could set everything to align to center if I want. Maybe I want to make sure that all of my table cells, all of those rows are exactly a 1/2 inch deep. I can set that and then float the text inside of it if that's what I want to do. So for right now, I'm just going to set 9 points for my padding around each of those cells. You can place graphics within a cell and define those. Apply strokes and fills and diagonal lines. This is where when you start combining style sheets with manual formatting is kind of where some of the confusion can come in. I generally leave strokes and fills out of the equation on a cell level. Usually whenever I format tables, I'll format the text area to have extra room and spacing, but then I'll handle all of the text itself, I'll handle with a paragraph style sheet, and if I want rows around everything or on rows or columns, some variation of that, I'll usually set those through the table settings. So I'm just going to create those cell styles and just give it actually 10 points of padding. And if we go up here to the general tab, you'll see that we can define a paragraph style for this. So I can create a new paragraph style from here. I'm going to call this table cell body text. I'm going to change my typeface to Arial, make it 11 points, and we'll leave it at that. Say OK. So that's applied as the paragraph style for all of those cells. You see it changed in our preview. Say OK. And now if I want to change my text at all, I can do, if I go back over to my paragraph styles panel, pull this up here. we can see there's the table cell body text that I just made. And I can do the same thing for the headers. So I'm going to go up here to my header, select that, go to cell styles. I'm going to add a new cell style, call this these are going to be my header cells. And I'm going to base it on my body styles. I want the padding all to be the same. I don't have to base it on it, but for this I'm going to. And then strokes and fills, it's filled with black, and I can create a new style sheet then for my text to make sure that it's white. So I'm going to say, go back up here to general, and with paragraph styles, I'm going to create a new paragraph style, base it on, I'm going to base it on my table cell body text, change my color, it's already set, say OK, and OK. So now I've applied some formatting. So I've combined table cell style sheets with paragraph style sheets. When you're formatting the text inside of a cell, table cell, space before, space after generally has no effect. It's generally just your type that gets the treatment. You can use rules and that kind of stuff. Generally anything, it's just that the cell padding is controlled by the cell styles, or by the table itself, not by the paragraph style sheet. So I could go back into actually I think this was my, oh, yep, I didn't name it, I guess. Table header style. Say OK. And now if I want to go back in there and make it bold and maybe 14 points instead, I can do that from my style sheets. If I go back to my table styles, to my base table, I now have cell styles and header styles. I can set my header rows to header cell, my body rows to body cells, and say OK. If I go down here to this table, select all of that, and apply my base table. Look at that. It did not apply the header style because I don't have a header cell I don't have a header row in this one. But not to fear, if I select that, go to table, convert rows to header, there we go, and it picks up the style sheet. And when I go to the next page, I'll have a header row on that as well. So that is basics of working with tables, all right? So what I want to do is on Brightspace, there should be, wrong tab. On Brightspace, there should be a document in the Project 4 folder. And it should be copy. Let's see here. It should be titled, not copy doc. It should be titled Project 4 iPhone Cell Sheet Copy. This is the copy you're actually going to use for your iPhone cell sheet. So make sure you have that. We're going to do that one last. Grab the table, just the table out of it. All right. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to create a new document. And make it inches, just 8.5 by 11 is fine. And we're just going to do, I want you to do 2 pages. And just set it to a single column. Keep things nice and clean so there's nothing extra kind of mucking up the workspace. Say create. So you should have that Word document, which we'll use in a minute, and then this. So the first thing I want you to do is, wasn't paying attention. I'm going to do this again. I don't want my primary text frame in this. All right. So let's create a table. So without putting a text area on the page, I just want you to go up to the table menu and say create table and give it 5 rows by 4 columns with 1 header row. And then when you've got that, say OK. And your cursor should look like this. Just click there in the corner of the margin and drag it out. You can drag it all the way across the page or only part way. Doesn't really matter. I'll just draw mine part way across. So you should have a table with 1-point rules around all the cells. Everybody got that? So grab your selection tool over here from your menu. Click on that and just pull these handlebars out. That's your text frame. So your table lives inside of your text frame. And then I just want you to sort of, if you click in one of those in the top cell, you can either highlight a single cell, or you can pull your cursor out just beyond the corner till it turns into that black arrow and select the entire table. And if you go over top of it, it'll turn to a vertical arrow. And you go over top of it, you move it to the side, you can highlight individual rows. All right? And holding down the shift key, you can do multiple rows. All right? So let's do this. guy down here, put that away. So with your cursor in a table, or if you highlight the entire table, you can change number of rows, add additional rows, but add 2 columns to it. So you should get that, unless you drew a really small table in the upper corner of the page. You should get that. Yes. More rows by, if you highlight the table, so highlight the whole thing. I went and did it from the control bar up here. I'm using a typography layout. For most things I do, I'll use a typography layout. So you can do it there, but you can also do it from, if you go over to your table menu, if you don't have that table panel, you can get it from the window, go from up the window, type in tables, table. But you can also do it from there as well. Anybody need me to do any of that again? We all good? All right, so we need to fix this up. So just click in here over top of the vertical lines and just sort of drag these over. We're not going to worry about how big they are specifically. We just want to get our entire table back inside of our text area. I think there's a faster way to do this, but we're just going to do it this way to move stuff around. So I'm just going to make it match. So you should just be able to pull these dividers to get everything back inside of the text area. And then just select, so if you put your cursor up over top of the row, the table should turn into that black arrow. Click on it, highlight that column. Then if you hold down the Shift key, select a couple of the other columns. All right. And then you can either go to up the table, down to distribute columns evenly, or you can right click on the table and go to distribute columns evenly. And just the columns that you have selected, it should even those all out. We all got it? Yes? No? I feel like there's a no somewhere in the room, but. All right. So that's setting up a basic table, all right? So now, set up a basic table, we kind of move stuff around. Let's go ahead and let's do a little bit of formatting with this, even though we don't have any text in it. So put your cursor over the top corner and select the entire table. Just like that. And then right click on it, go to Table Options, Table Setup. And we're just going to remove all of the strokes from this entirely, all right? And put in gray rows. So under Table Setup, go down to the table border, and we're just going to set that to 0. And if we go to row strokes, well, set that to 0, say OK, just to click out of it and see the results. Let's do that. Tap the W key. So I got rid of the outer border. Now I'm going to select the entire thing again, right click, and do the rest of it. I'm going to go back to Table Setup, go to row strokes. So here's the part that makes sense, I guess, once you understand it. So alternating pattern, you're going to set to every other row. What this alternating pattern does for row strokes is it allows you to take every other row and give it a heavy, basically a heavy rule, and then the one immediately after a thin one. So you might have a data table of some kind that requires that, but for what we're doing, yes?
So I was messing around with it.
Yeah.
You just go to like, so you highlight it,
Mm-hmm.
table, cell options,
Yes.
rows and columns.
Mm-hmm.
Under strokes and fills, you can take them all off like right there.
Right. Yeah, you can do it with the cells as well. Yeah.
Like,
Right.
But I mean, like without having to do that thing.
What's that?
Like it takes them all off.
Oh,
You know what I'm saying?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you can do it through cell options as well, and even through cell styles. So I'm just going to use the table options for this just to sort of run through, because the other option here is that, you can use this to alternate the styles on the different rows and whatnot. So I'm just going to set every other row to 0. Set that to 0. And column strokes, I'm going to do the same thing. Every other column. And remove them all that way. But you are right. You can select everything, go under cell options, change them to 0, and do it that way as well. So the cells, it'll take it off in here under row setup as well. And for that matter, let's undo that, Command Z a couple of times. So for that matter, you can also, under cell options, strokes and fills, mess with them in the border setups as well. Yes?
I did everything that you did.
Yep.
All I have left is a line,
A single line.
a single line.
Right. So, right. So the cell method that Kelly just pointed out removes them from absolutely everything. If we're using the table setup method, it leaves the one row, it leaves the one line right underneath the header row. That's the one you had, right? Underneath the top. So you can either use your cells to clear that one out as well, or if you, let me go back and do that again. Table setup.
But when I highlight it, should there be like the tables for it? Because I don't.
Right. Yeah. Hang on just a half a sec. So you ended up with that. So if you just select, so you can just remove that one as well, just by highlighting the header row and change the stroke up here to 0 as well. You can do it there, or you can use table, cell options, strokes and fills, and make sure it's done there as well. Simply having that be blank isn't enough to do it, so. So the reason, and part of the reason I didn't use the cell method, even though it's pretty much a one-click option, was that if I want to go back in here and have just lines, like lines between each of my rows, the simpler way to handle that is by, hold on. Simpler way to handle that is through the table options, alternating row strokes, set them both back to 1 point, or whatever point size you want them to be. %. And you can put lines just directly between each of the rows. Any questions on that? All right. So let's do this. Were you able to download the Word document? This is all I really want to pull out of this. It's just the table portion. So if you just select all this text, you can copy that. One thing to point out, we're just going in and selecting text out of this document right now. We're just going to do it this way because we just want to focus on the table portion. If we were to place this entire document the same way I did with the Excel file, all the text would come in and the table would actually come in with this basic formatting. So just know that there is a way to get the table to come in directly. I just want to do this and use the create table from text feature. So, and this does some funky things, but I want to explain how that works. All right. So I'm just going to copy this text. Oops. Go back to my InDesign file and just pull that off to the side. Create a text box. About that big. And I'm going to do some things here that aren't going to give us all the results we want, only because I want to work through them. So, draw a text box and then paste that text in there. And I'm just going to zoom in on this so I can see everything. Everybody have text in a table? Okay. So once you've got it, just highlight that text, go up to table, convert text to table. And by default, So it's the column separator is the tab. The row separator is paragraph. Those are the two key things we need to know here. So if we say OK, it's not exactly what we want, is it? So we're going to undo this in a moment, and I'll show you how to fix it. Some tables come in just fine, work this way just fine, and some don't. There's a reason that this one didn't. So, and we're going to sort of troubleshoot here a little bit. But obviously one thing we could do is to copy all this text and paste it where it belongs. It's kind of time consuming, all right? But one of the things, and you can do this or not, doesn't matter. I just want to show you because it'll happen to somebody sooner or later. So if you just highlight and copy the text, cut it and paste it, it all works just fine. If you highlight the text, but highlight the entire cell and copy that and go over here and paste it, watch what happens. We copied the entire cell and pasted in, which isn't really what we want. So when you copy and paste out of a table, you kind of want to be careful. Make sure that, the way I always make sure I do it is I just click, like, if I just click twice, it'll give me a word. If I click a third time, it'll basically select all the text. If I click a fourth time, it'll deselect it. So just by sort of triple clicking on it, we'll select only the text. It's a sure way to easily do it. You can also just highlight it and obviously and select it, but you got to kind of fight with the cell sometimes. So I'm going to undo all that, and I'm going to undo back to this point. So let's take a look at that again real fast. So with all this highlighted, convert text to table. So it's separating columns at the tab, and it's separating rows at the paragraph, all right? So cancel. So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the hidden characters. So if we go up under the type menu, this is why I've done this like 3 or 4 times, just by taking a look at the hidden characters. A lot of times you can troubleshoot this kind of stuff. So we take a look at hidden characters, zoom in here a little bit. What do we see? Our original document had the inches, but then it had millimeters directly below it, all the way through here. When we copied it out and pasted it in, it brought a paragraph break between the inches and the metric measurement. And because there's a paragraph break in here, it's using a paragraph to return to a new row. So that's why we're not getting the results we want. So rather than copy and paste all of those cells after formatting the table, I'm just going to stick my cursor here and delete that return space. There's a return space right there. I want to make sure I only have return spaces after each row. So this very last one's going to stay. So here's my second row. If I place and here's a trick too. You can either place your cursor on the next line and delete up and then put a space in. Or if you place your cursor just before that paragraph symbol, hold down your function key and then delete, it'll delete forward. And put a space back in there. And I'll do the same thing here. Function key and delete forward. And now, when I select so now I've got, this is a tab, Width, there's a tab. Height, there's a tab. Depth, there's a tab. Weight, there's a paragraph break, which is going to give me a new row. So there's a tab here, a tab here, a tab here, a tab, and a paragraph break, which is going to give me a new row. Oh, I missed one. All the way out here. There. So I removed all those extra paragraph breaks. Now if I select all of this, table, convert text to table, and say OK, I've got everything in the cells that I want it to be in. Any questions about that, or do I need to do it again? Anybody? All right. So let's format this a little bit. Why don't we start off with, before we get into paragraph styles, mess with the table itself, why don't we set some styles for the body and then for our header? So actually, I'm going to go ahead and make this first row a header. Right now, it's not a header row. So if I select this header, this first row, and I go to table, convert rows to header, that'll give me a header row. I want to format all these differently, so I'm just going to select all my body text, go to my paragraph styles, add a paragraph style, call it table body cell text. Again, I always try to name my style sheets very clearly as to what they are, because if I get a document with very many style sheets in it, I want to be able to pick out the ones I want to modify. So let's do that. Let's go to basic character formats. I'm going to change it from Minion Pro to Arial. Regular, 11 points. And we're just going to leave it at that. Arial, regular, 11 points. Say OK. And then I'm going to select my header, and I'm going to make a paragraph style for that as well. So I'm going to select this table body cell text first, then create a new one. Table header cell text. Base it on my body cell text. And I'm going to change it from regular to bold. Make it 13 points. Say OK. Now that's applied that. And all the other formatting we're going to do through our table panel. All right. So why don't we remove all the lines from this to start with? And let's do it the cell style way. Let's go under table. Instead of doing table options, we're going to go to cell options instead. Go to cell options, strokes and fills, and just change the 1 point to 0. Now I'll remove everything. Just say OK. Oh, I should have done one other thing while I was in there. So actually, we'll select, I'm just going to select the body cells. And Let's go back to table, cell options, select text this time. And let's give some extra padding to all of this. So right now it should be zero, probably 0p4. I'm just going to increase that to a full pica of padding around all those. So that basically is changing the space within the cell, the padding within the cell. Yeah.
Mine's in inches.
Say it again.
Mine's in inches. Does that mean I when I first created the document?
So if it's in inches, do 0.125, do 1/8 of an inch. Whatever unit of measurement you happen to be in, just pick something that gives it more room. Do that, say okay. And I'm going to create a cell style out of that. So with all that selected, I'm going to go to, if you don't have cell styles as an option in your panels, mine's down here, but if you don't have cell styles as an option, go up to Window, type in tables, and make sure you got the tables set pulled up. So we're going to go into cell styles, create a new cell style, just like we create a paragraph style, create body cell styles, base it on nothing, but I'm going to go down here to paragraph styles and select the table body cell text that I made. So we made a paragraph style, we're going to apply it to a cell style. So that anytime we apply this cell style, it's going to automatically format the text that way. And everything else should match the settings that we've already set here. So we'll just say okay. And then I'm going to select my header text. We're going to create a new style for that. So I'm just going to create a new cell style. Cell style 1, open that up, call it header cells. And we're going to base it on our body cells. If your preview checkbox is selected, you should see it format right away. And I forget if I already had. And I'm going to fill that top row with black. So I'm going to change this to be down here under strokes and fills in my cell style options. Strokes and fills. Go down here to cell fill and select black. I don't think tint will matter, but I'm going to set it to 100. And say okay. Now when we deselect, our text disappeared because it was still black. So we're going to go to our style sheet and change that. Paragraph styles, table header, cell text, character color, change it to paper, and say okay. And there we've got it. So the process I followed there was, I selected all of my body cells, and I roughly formatted, or I selected all my body cells, and I created a paragraph style sheet for those to format my text, because I can't format text directly within the table and cell styles settings. So I did that with a paragraph style. Once I'd done that, with those same cells selected, I went to my cells style sheet, style panel, and created and formatted those, and then created a style sheet out of it. And then I highlighted my header row, and I kind of did the same thing for that, but I based it on my body paragraph styles as well as my body cells under table cells. And let's do one more thing, two more things to this, and we'll be done. So let's select the whole thing, and I'm going to go under table options, alternating fills. Let's do alternating pattern every other row. One will be black 20, and the second one will be filled with none. Say okay. Except that I want to change this around. I want my first one to be white or clear, and my second one to be gray. So let's select that whole thing again. Alternating fills. And I could either reverse the settings here, or the simple way of doing that is say skip first one row, and you'll see it happen so long as the preview is checked. Skip first one row, say okay. And you should have something that looks like that. And there's one other thing I still don't like about this, which is I'm just going to, so my millimeters, my metric, I'm going to make sure are all on the second row here. Actually, from a layout and design point of view, there's a lot not to like, but like consistency with the inches and whatnot, but we're not going to mess with that for right now. I'm going to select this text. I want the millimeters to be smaller. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to do that with a character style. It's like we did on Thursday when we looked at paragraph and character styles. So selecting that, I'm going to go to my character styles, create a new one. Call this, I don't know, small type. And I want to go over to the basic character formats and set that to like 8 points. And say okay. And then I'm just going to highlight my millimeters line on all of these and apply that. Across the board. You do not have to format your table in your cell sheet, your iPhone cell sheet this way, but you can. You can format it any way you like. But I at least wanted to run through it because I want you to do that for the assignment. to format that table, all right? And I'll explain why here in a moment whenever we talk about that assignment. Any questions about this? When we're done here in your work, and if you have any questions or there's anything you missed, ask. I also tried an experiment with this one and I recorded it. So I'll put it up on my Dropbox when I'm done and send you guys the link. See how that works out. I don't know how the audio will come out, but we'll see. All right. So that's formatting tables.